My name is Nadine Khalil. I'm editor of Canvas magazine, and I have with me here today Jolene Frizzle, Faisal Hassan, Afra Dhahiri, and Buthayna Kazim. We're looking at disruption in a different way from the first series, trying to go beyond reactionary responses and to see what possible new structures might arise in the art world. So to start with, I would like to unpack the idea of disruption in terms of space and time. Rather than looking at disruption as an interruption, we are trying to assess how different spaces or how our ideas of spaces have changed, and also how our time is lived differently, not in the same embodied ways as it was before in terms of art experiences. I would like us to be wary about the idea of disruption when we think about innovation, in that it might be too soon to predict what will happen, but at the same time we can already be witnesses to what is currently arising in new ways of making, producing, showcasing, and supporting the art world. At a time when everyone is looking at collective ways of experiencing this moment, I would like to go back to the individual, to the artist, and to see what very personal experiences can say about the global condition. And so I'd like to begin with Afra Dhahiri, who is an artist and an assistant professor as well of visual arts, and who also recently attained gallery representation with Green Art Gallery here in Dubai. And so basically the question that I have for Afra is, as someone who has a foot in, say, both sides of the art industry, one in terms of the commercial side of the gallery model, and another in terms of being part of a nonprofit art collective, BET. So I would like to see how you position yourself, not just as an artist, but also as a contributing member of the art world.
At a time like this, it's hard to think about what's next, anticipating what the artworks or like what artists are making at the moment is going to look like after this time.
How do you extrapolate from your very personal practice, which deals with issues of time and the passing of time and decay, you know, in terms of architectural facades, to a more collective shared experience that you are having, also as an educator? How do we transpose from the individual to the collective? So maybe we can start with your own practice, because I know it's shifted.
It's kind of like ironic. At the beginning, I was thinking, well, I always yearned for slowing down time, and I always like wanted to go back to times where, you know, we had a slower pace and had more time to experience our processes and so on. But then now I'm like, given that, but I'm also confined with a space, which is my home, that I'm practicing in. And so I think like my attention sort of shifted. So I'm examining some of the processes that I'm working with. For instance, a lot of moments in the process of my work reminds me of processes that take place in a kitchen. And maybe because I've been cooking and baking, it's something I've always done. When I was living in the States, I would go to my kitchen when I'm stressed or stuck in my process. I would cook, and that would calm me down. But now it became something that I'm presented with, like, this is what I have access to anyways. And so I started creating links between the kitchen, the tools, and the practice. I think something that was very evident to me was the process of working on my hair drawings and slowing even more, like when I collect my hair and try and start to apply to the paper. This time I tried to actually like organize it. And so that took more time, and picking the hair and choosing which ones fit for this process or not actually made me think of like how my grandmother used to handpick rice and separate it.
Do you think that now what we're experiencing might shift attention to process as opposed to product or object, when if there is a sense that in the near future there will be no concrete show, or there will be no viewing, say, do you feel that artists are more focusing on processes of making and sharing those processes rather than focusing on what the final object will look like? Obviously, this is a time of stepping back, pausing, reflecting, and something very interesting that you said is part of your looking back was to go back to the journals when you were at RISD, and there was one particular work where you were baking the cement, right, and experimenting with it. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of avant-garde practices that happened in the kitchen elsewhere in times of not necessarily confinement, but say limited resources. And I'm wondering if that's something we can anticipate from artists individually or collectively.
It's a very interesting transition because like a year ago, we were like rushing into projects and not having time to really expand on our processes, and we had to like just deliver. And then now we're like granted all this time, which I think is going to actually result in like better works and more like not just process-based, but like research-based, something that is really like engaging for the artist, something that's thoroughly examined and processed. And I think that in terms of like going back to my journals, I think that, and I've heard a lot of my friends, my artist friends who've done that too, who've like start digging into their older journals. I personally brought out, yes, my journals that had a lot of like notes of my critiques when I was at RISD. And yes, I was reminded of one of the critics who were visiting me, actually, Chris Ho. He came to my studio. He saw my experiments with cement. I was pouring glass onto the cement. I was embedding fabric, coating it with plaster, and then pouring glass onto it, like really testing and pushing the limits of the material to understand like what else I can take out of it, or like how it responds to the conditions which are critical. And testing that. And yeah, he talked to me about why not think about, presenting this work as a form. I remember him saying once, like, you're like this mad chemist in your lab, always trying to like find things, and like you're trying to test things, and you're always after something. And I was talking to you, Nadine, when I told you I started journaling now, my process and what I'm making right now. And I realized that at some point I actually answered that question and said, well, my studio is it's not a lab, it's actually a kitchen.
Right. I love that comment. I mean, look, as someone who comes from the publishing industry for the last couple of decades, I will say there's a bit of a disconnect between cultural producers, cultural workers, and cultural critics. Or critics. Critics search for the discourse around the work. That makes the work to a quite large extent. I always find it very enlightening when I speak to people who set up exhibitions, who make it work, who produce exhibitions, or those who make art. And it's a more material consideration. And so when we had that conversation recently, I felt that somehow, somewhere, your work has always embodied material and ethereal considerations, but now it's moving more towards the ethereal, to the things you can't necessarily define or make in concrete or encapsulate. So that's something interesting. But the research and the discourse is just as important. It also makes the work,
Yeah,
so I really see that is kind of where we're going, which leads me to Jolaine Frizzle, who I'm very excited to have with us today. Jolaine's background is in art history, and you've really been part of the gallery circuit here in Dubai at Layla Heller and then at Third Line. Now you are starting a very exciting new initiative as director of the Institute of Emerging Art, which I'll let you speak more about. But from what I understood, it is an artist-driven platform, which looks at emerging and unrecognized artists, and it's the research arm of an arts advisory that was established by Salma Shaheen. So the first question that I have for you is, how will you bring these artists to light in a research-driven or archival way? What are you planning?
It's a good question. I think the idea of the unknowns is not necessarily that they're completely unknown, but that they are not fully part of the circuit of the commercial art world. Coming from my background of a commercial gallery, before Leila Heller, I was working with Kasia Hildebrandt, and I was coming here, for 10 years. I've been coming to every Art Dubai that, since it started. And meeting the artists of the region, I've always found that there's artists who haven't quite fit. Either they're emerging, or for some reason their path has taken them in other directions. And working in a gallery, and they every day, artists would come in and they'd say, "Oh, come and I'd like to have a show in your gallery." And some of them, it was they weren't the right fit. But sometimes there were people that had talent and vision and were exciting, but it wasn't the right moment for the gallery. And I think that there's a lot of situations over time that I've really witnessed, and I'm excited to kind of look at how to help artists move forward in their careers. That it's not enough that they're just making work in their home, and that they have somewhere to show it, that they have someone to look at it, they have some sort of way to have a discourse around it, and critique and potentially maybe sales. But I think that we're in a really different this moment, but I also think even before this COVID moment, galleries aren't taking young artists. Afra has, gallery representation, but I'm sure 50 artists, that don't have gallery representation. I meet with young artists and they tell me, they say, "What do I want? I want to be represented by a gallery." And they don't realize that this is a new world. And I think even more so now, we have the tools to get online, to have conversations about their art. We have opportunities for artists to find their communities throughout this World Wide Web, throughout collectives, and to think about new ways of experiencing art.
The art ecosystem in the UAE is not mature yet, which is good. There's a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, the art system, the art industry is extremely formalized. As an artist, if you don't have gallery representation, what do you do? I really, really think that if this lasts very long, sure, mid-sized and smaller galleries were always going to have it very tough, but I really think it's going to change. I'm looking back, also inspired by Afra, to the 60s and the 70s, at when artists, kind of did their own shows. And I think this might actually become more prominent in the UAE. Beit is currently the only artist collective. It just shows you that somewhere there's a gap between the institution and the artist. And I think spaces like Warehouse and like Cinema Akil are filling that gap by reaching out to the community and seeing, a more bottom-up grassroots approach at what is needed and finding a niche in that space. But it's also it really is down to individuals, people in the media industry, institutes, educators to bridge that gap. So, I guess my question to you was more at how are you engaging with the artists and what can you provide for them? Because as far as I understand, there is this archival element of documenting what has not been maybe disclosed in a formalized way. So if you could just give me a sense of the structure, whatever it is that you can say about how are you engaging with artists. I know, for example, before the lockdown, you were doing a lot of studio visits. You really get to know who the artists are by going to final projects at universities or through people. People tell you about other people who are doing work.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun to do exactly like you say, have one person give me, a few people, I go in and meet them. I've gone and continued on the conversations, but I've also in all the kind of conversations that we have with everyone, I try to sort of take some pictures of their work to start my own personal, it's not a public archive at the moment, but start to kind of collect the documents and start asking them, what do you want to do? What do you need? What do you feel like you don't have the resources to? Do you do know about these different kind of opportunities for you, whether it's formal things and formal organizations like Warehouse, or, you know, opportunities in terms of education, but also do they know about residencies? Do they know about grants? Do they know about all these kinds of things? And do they feel that they have an artist statement that really reflects their practice? When they look at their website, you know, when I look at their website, does it work? Do I find 700 images that they've ever made? Or do I have a really nice, you know, a user-friendly website where I feel like after being in their studio and after looking at their website, do they have something that matches? And so for what I've been doing, it's been very one-on-one, very individual, very non-methodical in terms of looking individually at, in terms of mentorship, in terms of advice, and kind of going one by one. And then in this moment, we've been sort of stepping back and trying to think about how do we institute that as a more formal structure.
Is there something sociologically that you could say at what most of the artists, I know it's early stages, but what most of the artists are telling you is needed? Because I think that would be useful for everyone in this room.
They want people to come and engage with their work. They want interest. It's not about selling on the one level. It's discourse. Yeah. They want the back and forth. I don't know if
it's the conversations that are not necessarily coded in writing that are the most impactful and valuable. And this is why today, which actually is a nice transition to Buthaina, I think maybe Buthaina, you have a very challenging task ahead of you. As the founder of Cinema Ail, which is currently the only art house cinema here, you've been providing a very intimate cinematic experience to the community here, looking at very select independent films, but also now with the hiatus, let's say, in terms of having this physical viewing experience, you've come up with online programming that engages in discourse around films. I really want to talk to you about something that you've mentioned to me earlier, which I think is very forward-looking, and Faisal also came up with a similar comment in that, you know, first there was the shock of closure, and now there's the shock of reopening. What is going to happen to the cinematic experience?
Yeah, so I mean, look, there's a lot of different, considerations that we have to make at this time, and a lot of it is influenced by the larger international film circuit that we're very much part and parcel of, even as a single screen cinema based here in Al Sirkal Avenue in Dubai. A lot of our considerations, our programming, our networks, our markets, our festivals, etc., are all influenced by the relationships and the direct exposure to a very robust ecosystem of exchange. And all of that is being overhauled. And we are just, somewhere down the line of that domino effect. All of that in place in terms of, our programming considerations, in terms of the ecosystem is pushing us to think about, what kind of space we occupy here, how we're going to go about doing things, what kind of programming we're going to offer. But most importantly, to really think hard about what it is that we tried to do. When we set up this space, when we set up a brick and mortar establishment from a nomadic platform. And by the way, our nomadic iteration has always existed, much to our advantage and much to our, I think, core value in bringing cinema to our audiences here, and a commitment to partnerships and a commitment to outreach. And Warehouse421 is a very good example of how we've been able to traverse borders and communities and the idea of just programming to really speaking to this urgency and need and craving that surrounds the desire to come to independent cinema screenings. And, we had our longest running contemporary Arab cinema series under different themes at Warehouse421, and time again, screening after screening, we were proven, very well on the mark that, the thing that we're betting on is the strength of community. And I think that's something that, is the only sort of lasting factor, or the only consistent factor that we have to think about in terms of what is it that we offer? Cinemas at large, and the cinema industry and the theatrical exhibition industry has already been, being pressed into, answering the tough questions about the survival of cinema screens with the emergence of VOD technologies and subscription technology and, multi-screen experiences and so on. But the thing that does, hold true and even held true, before COVID crisis was that independent cinemas and art house cinemas, stand a higher chance of surviving and of reinventing, not only because they're small and nimble and malleable, but also because there's a very strong community element that, will always, seek to support it. That doesn't change the fact that a lot of our space, a lot of our work is tied to physical presence and bringing publics together and bringing bodies together. And we remain committed to that experience if and when it becomes safe. In the interim, the thing that we've tried to focus on beyond the sort of, overwhelming, sort of knee-jerk reaction or the panic kind of mode to really try and do something. That was sort of a phase that I think a lot of organizations went through on different levels, is to try and find, a channel of staying relevant, staying connected. Yes, we launched a partnership with Mubi, which is sort of the art house or independent answer to Netflix, to bring our audiences, sort of their ration or helping of the kinds of films we would usually do at the space, and then built programming around it, whether it was recommendations, whether it was editorial content, whether it was even our Cine Talk series, which came out of that need to kind of bring people in a room together. And I think for us, the answers in the future are going to have to solve for that, the specificity of the role that we play in this context, which is, bringing people together in a public space around the language of film. We're looking at everything from reinventing our, pop-ups experiences, looking at, environmentally conscious, answers to drive-in cinemas. And everybody's touting that as the future of cinema and the return of the drive-ins, and everybody's so excited about that sort of revival of nostalgic memory. But as much as I have that sort of soft spot for that particular moment in cinema, it is a temporary sort of solution. A lot of these are going to be stopgap solutions that will carry over after this period has passed and changed us in ways. But I don't think there's a doubt in my mind that there is a yearning and a continued kind of yearning for congregation and for coming together. Yeah. So the question in the interim is going to be, how do you do that safely? How do you make it, viable? And we're looking at, as we speak, we're designing redesigning our space to keep in mind, all the different recommendations and regulations. And there isn't a template. There's best practices, and there's our commitment to community and finding a solution that, allows us to continue bringing people together on film in a safe and controlled manner. And that's going to be a tough time. Obviously, we're a sort of cultural enterprise that is highly dependent on daily F&B and ticket sales, and our pop-up experiences and our pop-up cinemas. And all of those are going to have to be reimagined and rethought and reconfigured to deal with the current situation. But we're not alone in that, and we have to recognize that. And we're also very engaged with our networks in, for example, the House Convergence, which is a network of 700 cinemas and exhibitors of art house cinemas all over North America. And we're looking at their different models and their different experiences through different phases of opening and reopening, as well as consistent solidarity and working group meetings in the network of Arab art house screens.
So I'm wondering what other art house cinemas in the region, what kind of conversations you're having with them. Because I think film is a very specific experience. I mean, on the one hand, it's very solitary, but at the same time, it is a social experience. I guess this is my question to you. What is your network telling you of, peers in the industry? And the second thing that I wanted to ask you is, to what level can you measure the engagement of the people, who are like actually remaining for the whole viewing?
I mean, look, we've always talked about this idea of, the shared darkness and the shared experience of coming together around, the cinema language and the cinema world and that magic that entails. So there's that sort of bet that we're all making, around the world. There are no direct answers. There are a lot of different experiments right now that are, unprecedented. Cannes, at the very last minute had to make a very tough call of canceling this year's edition and the parallel marché de film, which is the most important, arguably the most important film market in the world. They have launched a sort of a unprecedented, collaborative, online festival in collaboration with all these sort of A-lister festivals, including Sundance, including Berlinale, including a host of other top festivals that have decided to put their budgets together to make a film festival available for free on YouTube Live. And it's called the We Are One Festival. It is completely new. It is unexpected, but it is an answer to, the frustrations of, filmmakers whose works are not going to be discovered. There are all these different sort of stopgap solutions on an international level that are kind of shaping the way that the future of theatrical experience is going to be. At the same time, we're seeing, markets that have been affected by the crisis, now slowly reopen. For example, in China, there were a lot of different deals that were made with different studios to resurrect and rediscover classics and repertory cinema, and bring those back to the cinema halls. So everybody's trying different things, and we're kind of piecing together all this knowledge. In terms of the Middle East and North Africa, I think we're all pretty much in the same boat. Whether it's art houses or multiplexes, we're all looking at different degrees of closures. On the art house level, of course, from a NAS perspective, all of us are, faced with different levels of precarity. In Tunis, for example, there was an incredible decision at the very onset of this crisis for the Ministry of Culture to support the payroll of cultural workers, which really kind of eased the burden of those that are trying to reinvent the wheel. For others, oftentimes, in a very precarious context, you're having to invent or, think of ways to generate revenue, while also, plan for the future and sort of manage your your innovation and trying to disrupt your practice.
Right.
So there's these two sort of constant, juggling acts that are happening. Obviously, a lot of these solutions are specific to certain markets and contexts, and, the model is entirely different because we're still entering a new normal. And that's, I guess, to echo Faisal's, comment, what we were talking about yesterday, this idea of the shock of reopening,
Right.
what that's going to be like. So far, 49% people say that they won't come back to the cinema if it's indoors, even with social distancing measures in place. But in reality, as we adapt to the situation and as we, exist in this idea of what we think of what is being touted as the new normal, the interim normal is how I'm thinking of it, is going to change.
Fundamentally, I really do think it's about the disruption of the space-time continuum. And, now our times are fluid, but when we return, the idea of space will be disrupted, which is why I find interesting that, almost immediately in terms of the cinema industry, people are thinking of moving things outside because our idea of space is both smaller and larger, which brings me to Faisal Hassan. Faisal, you do many things at Warehouse, not the least overseeing the curatorial, but also the programming, as well as the community participation. So you are in touch with a lot of agents, actors, and stakeholders in the art community. So I feel like any information that you can provide would be really valuable in terms of what not just the networks are telling you, but also the emerging artists. What are they telling you? How are they envisioning the spaces in which they can showcase their work? So yes, so what are people telling you? What are you, what do you know that we don't right now?
I think I know pretty much as you know, maybe a little bit less even. I think the first few weeks, we all did not understand the magnitude of this situation that we're in today. Everyone thought it's a 2-week thing, maybe a 3-week thing. We're going to close and we're going to come back. And I think that that kind of led people to immediately start to go to the online to kind of just stay engaged with their audiences. Obviously, we're here today. The situation still continues, and there's no clarity to how long this is going to take. The uncertainty of the future is something that we need to deal with, and it's something that we need to just be ready for, be agile, be open-minded, and be ready to be experimental. In terms of conversations that we've been having, we've started having focus groups probably about a year ago, focusing a lot more on creative practitioners and talking to them, providing a safe and open space for them to kind of just discuss their, from their practice to their worries and concerns to their engagement with institutions. And it is a very private conversation just for us to kind of understand how they function and how we can actually support them. And we continue to do those conversations online post-COVID. And what we're trying to lead the conversation is to understand their thinking about the future and their practice, not only about how and when they can go back to the studio and to kind of produce new work, but thinking about modes of exhibition as well, because that's going to completely change. The purpose of these conversations is not to get answers, is actually to raise a lot more questions. We are asking questions, we're asking them to ask those questions, to think about them, and then we come back and talk about them again and again to expand that network of people that we can bring into this conversation. We're hoping that this conversation eventually will bring tech specialists, will bring researchers, will bring in galleries, will bring in government entities into the conversation to just try to kind of bridge that gap that you were talking about before, and try to understand what is this new way of living that we're getting into. A lot of my conversation with my colleagues from other spaces, public or private, is about when scenarios of when we can reopen. But what I'm concerned more with is scenarios of how we can reopen and how we can be ready to fail, because that is a very possible scenario. We need to be ready that people's appetite to come back and into our spaces is not going to be the same. I mean, humans are social beings. Eventually, we will want to be with people. We will want to go back and experience things. But how is that going to be? This is something that we need to be ready for and be ready to try and experiment in different ways. I keep hearing...
So we need to be more like artists.
We definitely need to be more like artists.
That's interesting, because when you're managing and heading an institution, it's interesting that a lot of even governmental actors are saying we need to go straight to the source, not just because we support them, because they know what it's like. Mm-hmm. They've been there before. They've tried and failed. At the end of the day, I think what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that we're going to look at even more collaborative forms of making work, and it's not going to be as specialized as it was before. Definitely. So
I think just to touch on that, I'm a little bit concerned with conversations that I'm tuning into online the past couple of months when we get invited to listen to conversations about the survival of the art ecosystem here. And you listen, the panels are usually from institutions and institutions only. And you don't hear the voice of the creative practitioners on these panels. We're talking about resilience, we're talking about reopening, we're talking about different ways of thinking about exhibition, but we're not inviting the producers to be part of that conversation. Yes, they're listening, they can engage with Q&A, but they should have a seat on the table every single time whenever we're talking about the new way of thinking about this art ecosystem. It should not be institutions talking alone and artists talking alone. We should have those conversations ongoing. And I think, I'm seeing positive signs in that, but at the very beginning, it didn't feel like it is, hearing the same conversations over and over, unfortunately.
I agree with you. That's why I want to move into the different ways in which you're creating content. Since your time at Warehouse, there have been a lot of symposiums, a lot of conferences, and a lot of workshops. But also there's a lot of conversation, and not necessarily with an intended output. How do you envision, even furthering the way in which you create content as an institution that is very close to the community and is very close to the artists and is a cultural producer in so many ways? How do you envision, kind of following on what Buthaina was saying, making the content relevant, visible, important, significant to engage with, your publics, existing and potential?
Well, first of all, you start with empowering creative practitioners right now to continue to produce, continue to search and do research, and give them the tools as much as possible to continue to do that. Artists are struggling today because a lot of them don't have the luxury of a gallery representation. They don't have a 9-to-5 job. There are a lot of them that are surviving on commissions, surviving on freelance work, on exhibiting works to sell. And with that gone, they cannot produce work. So the most important thing for us to do right now is to try to find ways to continue to have funding for creatives so that they continue to be able to do their work. And the other way also is to look at our programming and what makes sense for it to be online today, and how we can actually complement the physical experience with the online experience. I don't think we can actually just replace or work in parallel between these two. These need to be joined, and this is exactly what we need to look at. It is a reactionary period that we're living in, but I think we need to start to think as soon as we can about how we're actually moving forward. We need to protect the sacredness of the physical experience. That as an art institution is something that we cannot just let go of. But that physical experience, we actually don't know what it's going to look like in the future. How can you, guarantee that the same, rich experience physically, while, having a lot of concerns and considerations for the safety of your visitors, the safety of your employees, and the safety of the work that is in your space. Everyone's talking about 2020 is the year of crisis, 2021 is the year of recovery. 2021 is definitely not the year of recovery. I don't think 2022 is the year of recovery. I think we have about 2 years' time at least. I'm also crystal ball gazing here. I think we're going to need at least 24 months of trying and experimenting with different modes of presentation, exposition, connection with people. But I think at the core of all of that is the creative producers, making sure that they have the ability and the tools and the funding to continue to work. I don't think it is necessary for us to see actually physical production right now, but to continue to be able to do research, to expand on their practice, to an experiment, feeling comfortable that they can continue to do that without worrying about selling an artwork.
The slowdown is not just about sales, it's also about funds, as you said, and which is why I think big cultural institutions have a very important role to play if they have the right resources. We're on the cusp of something that's going to have long-term impact and may remain. So no one knows really, but it is again looking back at the idea of disruption, and I'm just wondering if we can unpack it a little. Do you think that the industry will be disrupted in that new modes will replace the old modes? If there is one thing that you would like to see on a personal level, Afra, for example, as an artist, or on an institutional level, what is it that you feel would match the expectation of where we're going at the moment? What kinds of forms of visibility, art making, community would you anticipate or like to see? What would you envision?
Faisal mentioned a lot of the grants and funds that are being created and that sort of surfaced in this time, and a lot of institutions started developing artist funds and artist, supports and so on. But I think one main problem that, if Faisal, what you're saying is right, and we're going to stay in this situation for like more than 2 years, I think one thing that's right now very crucial and important for artists is studio spaces for rent. And I think if an institution wants to help us artists produce and want to help artists actually, develop or somehow connect the dots of this ecosystem, there needs to exist a permit and I know I've heard a lot about this being in the cooking or in the making, but I think this is the right time to have those spaces be ready. And from where I sit, I also see students struggling with learning at home because they don't have healthy home environments to work or like suitable spaces at home to actually produce. And so having a space outside their home for their own use, or like small groups or small collectives, I think this is what we need. And as also a co-founder member of Beit 15, that's kind of like what we're doing right now. And I talked to you a little bit, Nadine, about this yesterday. We've been lending, lending as a metaphor, but like literally giving our space, our own studios to other artists who are more in need of them. Because I can, for example, work from home, but I have students, I have other artist friends who are really in need of this space, and we're giving the space to them. We're allowing them to
that's
use
something, the gap in the structure where you have the, highly formalized institutions and artists who have their training, but then there's something missing in between, which is the self-organized spaces for artists. And this is what I'm hoping to see, but I would definitely like to see more artists coming together. I think, Jolaine, you said something really interesting when we spoke yesterday on the phone. You said, artists can't expect galleries to solve their problems. And that's precisely the situation with artists who don't have representation, who are not allied with institutions, or who did not receive a grant, who are not part of SEEF, who somehow missed an opportunity because, there's a lot of competition. So I'm wondering what you would like to see as someone who's now taking this role that's kind of mediating between the artist and the institution to some extent, and providing, a system around, let's say, the discourse, the education, the knowledge, the discovery of different artists who are not, on the map.
Yeah, I agree. Studio spaces and all these things are amazing. And I think that, a lot of the artists that I've been speaking to have stopped their studio practice and have done research, or they're in kind of the research and sort of mode of, as, Faisal rightly said, over time, this is 2 years. This isn't just a month where you can cocoon for a month. You need to start being able to kind of go back and re-express yourself. And I think that this is something that is important too.
Buthaina, I also was wondering if you see, this whole sphere that you've created with Cinema Ail, which is insulated but at the same time discursive and allows for a lot of community exchange. Do you see the idea of the border between the inside and the outside dissolving in some way?
So it's something that was actually ingrained in the way that we set up as a nomadic cinema, like whether it's developing a particular editorial framework and a cinematic voice for a space. In the case of Warehouse421, that became the territory, that became the domain for contemporary Arab cinema from the past 3 years, that engaged with sometimes directly with the work that's on showcase and sometimes indirectly with the space as a larger ethos. And I think, one thing that just back to your hopes for the future. I think, one aspect that I really hope we all walk out with is the sort of built-in need to integrate the arts and cultural enterprises into the considerations when planning policy, when planning, economic policy and so on, and really thinking of it not only as a sort of a neo-capitalist framework, not only thinking of it as an asset, not only thinking of it as a luxury a tourism sort of stimulant, but as an actual quality of life indicator. Don't get me wrong, I think they're great. And I think it's the first time that we've actually seen this kind of influx or response, in terms of, government support or state-sponsored support for independent artists. And I just think, we're in dire need of that to find a way of being looked at as essential.
Faisal, I also have a couple of very specific questions for you. One, do you think certain kinds of cultural institutions will become defunct as a result of this two years down the line, or change their modes of operating in a very radical way? And second, do you see new jobs developing that don't exist yet between artists and institutions in some ways that they didn't before? So again, because you always have certain things that you need to tick, and now you're unable, for example, to hold shows, you're unable to have a certain kind of audience engagement on the ground. So how does that, affect the institution?
Of course, I mean, this is definitely something that, is going to change radically, for us and for other institutions. The way you measure impact is now something that you need to rethink completely. Just counting, footsteps into your door is something that you need to completely just throw out of the window right now. And start to think of other ways that you can measure impact. For us, the way we look at impact has always been different. We're a small space that is tucked away in the port area of Mina Zayed. So for us, the impact was always been on a more kind of personal level. How do you actually engage with the people that walk into your doors, and how do you make sure that they have, a longer kind of relationship with that space and with the art that's being presented and with the artist? In terms of how things will be, I think that's going to be something that we need to, think about. I think knowledge share is something that is very, very important right now. And I think this is something more than ever that we would need between institutions. We keep hearing that, institutions are thinking of new modes of doing business, new ways of reaching the public, new ways. We want to know what these are. And we want to be the first to share our experience and the way we're thinking about things. I think the way we do outreach is going to be something that will change dramatically. The physical experience, as I said before, we cannot, detach from that. But that will not be the same. I'm assuming the linger time of a visitor in your space is going to be a lot more limited than it was before. People will not want to spend hours in an exhibition, but rather read more about it, engage online at their own time in the safety of their space, with the artists, with other people that are talking about it. That's very important. It is a very important moment for us to just think a little bit deeper about what does it mean to take your exhibition online. Not just, a virtual tour will not replace the physical experience.
Even VR won't.
Definitely it will not. But there are different ways that you can complement that physical experience and enrich it a lot more.
And I think what you said is really significant. Funny enough, now we're bombarded but we have time, so we can choose to be distracted on the internet. We might end up reaching a point of more focused attention. We might end up at the point where we know we have this much time to spend with a show, so we're not like often people go to openings and they go back. This time you will go to see, it's going to be more focused, more targeted, more strategic. So it will take out some of the flair maybe and some of the random encounters that arise, but it might just make people a lot more kind of intentional, which would be a very strange world that, like right now, the way we engage with each other when you cross the street, there's a different sense of space. The space around you is larger, but you are in a smaller space. So this is why I do see perhaps a movement towards specialization and people with very specific functions because of, the lack of mixing that, is part of our time right now, who knows? So
And that's okay. That's actually okay. That's something that we need to be comfortable with, that who knows.
We don't have the answer.
We don't have the answer. We need to be open to that, to just not knowing the answer, not seeking to know the answers immediately.
Right.
I think everyone today wants to have an answer for now and wants to, be ready for tomorrow, knowing everything, and that's not possible. And we need to be okay with that.
Absolutely.
It's easier said than done, I know, and it's not, but it is something that we need to embrace and be ready for. And I think that's the only way forward.
You're right. It's okay to be open to uncertainty, and in a way, we're all going to become closer to artists in that way. Because if you think about the art profession, it's a very precarious one, as is working in culture. But it is definitely an interesting time that we're living in. Thank you all for tuning in.